I cannot tell you how excited I am to be here with you all at West End Collegiate. I will merely share a glimpse of our family life this morning. I have a 13-year-old and 11-year-old, and they like to drag their feet getting out of church, and I may have yelled back at them, marching out of our apartment 20 feet ahead of them, "Guys, this is the biggest, most exciting preaching opportunity I will ever have in my career. Do not make me late." It's true. For indeed, I have been so grateful for the ministry of West End. Throughout my ministry and the ministry that I have with the church in Greenpoint, you have been with us. For those of you who might not know this story, it was West End Collegiate who sent Dean Karen Blank, my college dean a few years after college, but boy, did I still think she was the dean. I was a little daunted on the Sunday after my ordination had been voted down by the classis of New York for my being an out gay person married to my wife, and sure enough, there was Dean Blank in our worship service. She was rather obvious because there were about 12 of us in church. And when the offering plate came around, she deposited a check from your congregation. It was the first gift to us that allowed me to move from having a full-time job to having a full-time job not in the church, I should say, to having a part-time job not in the church and a part-time job in the congregation to work on revitalizing it. But more than anything, I would say it was a reminder that when times are really difficult, we are not alone in the world. That in what was actually a really sad, horrible, difficult Sunday for me, I was reminded that there was a church on the Upper West Side, one that I had grown up hearing legends about from my father, that said, "We think that you're worthy, and we believe in the ministry that's happening in Greenpoint." And so I have always thought of our church in North Brooklyn as being West End to the east. Just a little bit of your own mission outpost. That we've had a shared ministry now for 15 years together. And so I am so grateful for this opportunity to come and to say thank you. Because any revitalization that has happened, any ministry that has gone on in North Brooklyn through our congregation wouldn't have happened without you. To be honest, if you would ask me about the congregation right now, I would say, well, I think we have a church still. The pandemic has been so hard, and it's so weirdly awkward to gauge like what's going on Zoom versus what's happening in person, that I'm not entirely sure we have a church. I was so confident 2 years ago. We were bursting at the seams, which is completely possible when you have a church that really seats about 60 people comfortably. We had a Sunday school. It was a happening joint, let me tell you. But now, I'm not entirely sure. If today's gospel story happened to me, that the devil came to tempt me, I think the temptation would be that I could be assured that we had a solid congregation and that my church would be there whenever this pandemic ended. And let me tell you, I would be tempted to go and take that bargain just to have the reassurance. Because at this point, 2 years on, I just feel discombobulated and out of sorts. I don't really know how to do church or be church, which you might find surprising because you might think, Ann Kansfield, you're up in that pulpit and you really have it together. You know how to be a pastor. You're the chaplain for the fire department. We need you to act like you know what you're doing. And you're right. We need one another to remind us that the church is going to be okay, that we are going to be okay. This is indeed a difficult time, a desert moment. It feels as though we haven't really known if we could eat for the last 2 years, let alone 40 days, We're a little famished. It feels like a test. Now, my other job is as a chaplain for the fire department. And yesterday, being the first Saturday in Women's History Month, there is an event, a fundraising event for cancer awareness that is targeted to women. A lot are women whose husbands are firefighters and who have battled World Trade Center-related cancers. The event is called Glitz, Glam, and Give. And because I am the glitziest, glammiest of all of the chaplains in the fire department, and the only one with a set of ovaries, I have been assigned to this event every year to pray. This time around, I once again brought my daughter, and I got a little smarter. I invited her to bring a friend as well. And so she and her friend and I loaded into our car as I drove down to the FDNY Museum, mulling over a prayer in my head, and trying to go and make this event seem kind of exciting to some 11-year-old girls. So we're driving down, and they notice there's someone walking a beautiful dog. And I say, you know what? I just saw on Instagram that Ladder 20 has a brand new Dalmatian puppy. If you girls are really good at this event that I have to pray at, we'll go and visit the puppy dog. What do you say? And they're like, that sounds pretty great. Yeah, okay. So I'm feeling like I've really got it together as a mom, right? And then we turn the corner, and there is Ladder 20. They have their ladder positioned on the top of a building, and I look over, and there's an engine that's got the water kind of spraying, and then I see the Dalmatian. So I pull over. It was kind of funny, actually, like, for a Dalmatian. They're like, hey, chaplain, what you doing? And I'm like, I'm here for the Dalmatian. What are you doing? They're like, we're drilling. It's our every Saturday morning multi-company drill. I didn't really take that in because I was so focused on the Dalmatian. I think it's a sign that I'm looking for endless love from a puppy. And I was like, well, I'm really interested in the puppy. The puppy jumped on me. Puppy jumped on the girls. It was really great. And then I said, hold it. You drill every morning, every Saturday morning out here? They said, well, yeah, how do you think we get our practice? There isn't any traffic today, so we can come, we can practice putting the ladders up, we can make sure that the hoses are operating, we can practice different things. Each week we practice a different technique. And then I realized, perhaps that's what's going on in this text today. That a drill is when we test out our capacities, when we make sure that things work, when we can try out new things and double check them, when we can reassure ourselves that we are ready for whatever might come. Perhaps Jesus is using this moment as a drill, practicing out, saying no to being tempted, practicing going without food and saying no to power. Perhaps this is the way that Jesus is getting ready for betrayal, for temptation. That Jesus is practicing quieting his own anxiety and fear. That Jesus is getting used to being subservient to God's will, preparing for his death. What if the next 40 minus a couple days of Lent, we use this opportunity to drill, to prepare, to practice. Now you might ask, what is it that we're going to practice? Well, I would say, how can we practice and model and share with one another notions of spiritual resiliency? I'm not entirely sure we as the church talk a lot about this. Spiritual resiliency, what might it look like to be spiritually prepared? Especially, how would we do that if we're already spiritually exhausted, ready to give up? Well, first off, I would say, look at those words in Romans. All we have to do is call out on the name of the Lord and we will be okay. So what if we shucked away our fears that our faith isn't enough and then practiced living out the values that Jesus has modeled for us? What might that look like? What might it look like to practice and drill on being loving, especially to the people who drive you crazy? What might it look like if we would practice identifying when we get really, really angry by someone and still trying to find a way to love them, even if we'd really like to growl at them? What would it look like if we practiced forgiving people? Even more challenging might be, what would it look like if we would practice forgiving ourselves? What might it look like if we were to practice generosity? What might it look like if we would practice being fearless or courageous? What new things might we want to try out if we weren't afraid of failing or looking foolish or whatever it is that keeps us from trying out the new things that God might be calling to us to try out? I would say that one of the gifts of my job in the fire department is actually that I am surrounded by a lot of loss at times. And you might say, how is that a gift? Well, I would say it's a gift because when you've lost a lot, you're forced a little bit more deeper into finding joy, into finding hope, into seeing God's grace around us. And I would say right now that 2 years into this pandemic, we are surrounded by loss. And it's in that loss that perhaps we will now be able to see God's love and God's grace and God's reassurance of the goodness of life around us. Now, I know that we have had wonderful ministries and big lives before the pandemic, but those may be gone. And perhaps this is the moment where freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose. Maybe you don't have to be the person you were before. Maybe it's our own calling to new life. You don't have to be that person. You don't have to be that church. We don't have to be that church. We don't have to be tempted to try to do the same things we used to do when we can see the new things that might bloom and blossom in our lives. I know that probably on the first Sunday of Lent, for every year since Jesus Christ roamed the earth, Christians have heard a sermon about giving things up for the season. This is not one of those sermons. Instead, I think it's time that we drill and practice receiving God's grace and sharing it with those around us. That we take the time to see and look and be open to the newness of life that is surrounding us, and to not be tempted to see the darkness. I have to say that this morning when I came here and was reminded that apparently people have a tendency to talk and socialize in church, I was delighted. I know, I probably shouldn't have been, but we are human beings and we can't help but love one another and want to greet one another and be with one another. And yes, we will still be quiet when we come into the sanctuary because these microphones are so nice that you can whisper and still be heard. But after church, I would encourage you all to experience the grace of God's abundance and to be reminded that you are alive and that you are loved and that you get to practice this over and over again. Just like a bouncing Dalmatian puppy taken out on drill day who gets splashed with the waters from the hoses and still jumps up and greets the puppy dog's chaplain and her daughters. God is like that puppy dog, just so delighted to see you and greet you and love you just as you are. May you know that love, and may you see it in those around you and share it with all whom you meet. Amen.